The dark ships came from the void between stars, their hulls made of something that looked like bone but moved like living muscle. Captain Zexthul stood on the command deck of the lead vessel, watching the blue and green planet grow larger on his screens. His 6 arms moved across the bio-controls with practiced ease. This would be harvest number 4037 for his fleet. "Scan complete," reported his second-in-command, voice bubbling through the translation fluid in his throat. "Standard carbon-based world. 1 dominant species. Scattered colonies. Estimated biomass sufficient for 3 cycles of fuel production." Zexthul's primary eyes focused on the readouts, while his secondary pair watched the planet. Earth, the local species called it. Such a simple name for a world that would soon feed their empire. The Ketharan had perfected this process over thousands of years. They would arrive, stun the largest life forms, then strip every organic molecule from the surface. Clean, efficient, necessary for their civilization's survival. "Atmospheric processors ready for deployment," another crew member announced. The massive ships began to position themselves around the planet. Each vessel was the size of a small moon, grown rather than built, their living hulls pulsing with biological systems that had been bred for one purpose: consuming worlds. Zexthul felt no emotion about what was to come. The Ketharan had evolved past such weaknesses. They took what they needed to survive, just as any species would. That these creatures would die was unfortunate, but irrelevant. Most worlds didn't even fight back once the atmospheric weapons took effect. "Begin Phase 1, he ordered. The first wave of atmospheric processors descended toward Earth like falling stars. Each one was designed to release a carefully crafted mixture of gases that would render most complex life forms unconscious within minutes. It had worked on every world they had encountered. Simple, effective, and it kept the biomass fresh for harvesting. But as the processors entered Earth's atmosphere, something unexpected happened. Warning signals began flashing across the bioscreens on Zexthul's ship. "Sir, we're getting interference with the processor deployment," his navigator reported, confusion clear in his voice. "Some kind of electromagnetic disruption." Zexthul moved to examine the readings himself. The atmospheric processors were failing to disperse their payload correctly. Instead of spreading evenly across the planet's surface, the gas clouds were being scattered by unusual wind patterns. Worse, many of the processors were simply malfunctioning. "Impossible," he muttered. "Run diagnostics on all systems." While his crew worked frantically, Zexthul watched the planet below. Through their bioscanners, he could see the dominant species moving with increasing urgency. Instead of falling unconscious as expected, they were organizing, communicating, preparing for something. "Diagnostics complete, sir," came the report. "All systems functioning normally. The interference appears to be external." "External interference?" Zexthul's voice carried a note of surprise. "From what? These creatures haven't even achieved full space travel." On the screens, he could see the human settlements lighting up with activity. Their primitive communication networks were buzzing with signals. Military installations were activating. Most puzzling of all, their civilian population was moving in coordinated patterns that suggested a level of organization that should have been impossible for such a young species. "Sir, should we proceed to Phase 2? Asked his second-in-command. Zexthul considered this. Phase 2 involved deploying the smaller harvest ships to begin limited extraction while the main atmospheric assault continued. It wasn't the preferred method, but they had encountered resistant species before. Usually, a show of force was enough to break their will. "Deploy Harvest Group 3 to the largest population center," he ordered. "Let them see what resistance brings them." A dozen smaller bioships detached from the main fleet and dove toward Earth's surface. These vessels were equipped with extraction beams that could pull organic matter directly from the surface, stripping away everything from trees to buildings to the creatures themselves. But as they approached their target, something even stranger happened. The planet's communication satellites, which should have been destroyed by the atmospheric interference, suddenly shifted in their orbits. They began transmitting signals that somehow disrupted the Harvest ship's navigation systems. "What are those creatures doing?" Zexthul demanded. "How are they coordinating their satellites during an atmospheric assault?" His crew had no answers. On the surface, the Harvest ships found themselves under attack, not just from human weapons, but from the environment itself. Weather patterns shifted impossibly fast, creating electromagnetic storms that interfered with their systems. Ocean currents changed direction, affecting the magnetic fields the ships used for navigation. Most disturbing of all, the planet's animal life was behaving in ways that made no sense. Large sea creatures were moving in coordinated groups toward the Harvest ships. Flocks of birds were abandoning their normal migration patterns to swarm around the alien vessels. Even insects seemed to be acting with purpose, their movements too organized to be natural. "Sir, Harvest Group 3 is reporting multiple system failures," came the urgent report. "They're requesting immediate extraction." Zexthul watched the screens in growing confusion. This wasn't how a harvest was supposed to go. The atmospheric weapons should have worked. The creatures should be unconscious. Instead, they were fighting back with a coordination that suggested they had been preparing for this moment for years. "Pull back Harvest Group 3, he ordered. "Prepare the main atmospheric bombardment. We'll use the full-scale approach." "Sir," his second-in-command hesitated, "that level of bombardment will destroy most of the biomass we came to harvest." "Better to take what we can than to risk the fleet," Zexthul replied grimly. "This world is not responding as predicted." As his ships prepared their most powerful atmospheric weapons, Zexthul found himself thinking about the intelligence reports they had received about this system. Earth had been marked as a standard harvest world. The dominant species showed normal development patterns for their age. Nothing in the data had suggested they would be capable of this level of resistance. But as he watched the planet below, with its impossibly coordinated response to their attack, Zexthul began to wonder if they had missed something important in their initial scans. Something that would explain how a species that had barely left its home planet could coordinate such an effective defense. The thought made his biosuit feel cold against his skin. In 4,000 harvests, the Ketharan had never encountered a world that fought back like this. They had evolved to be the perfect predators of organic matter, and no species had ever proven to be a significant threat. But Earth was different. As the main bombardment prepared to launch, Zexthul could only hope that overwhelming force would succeed where precision had failed. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the reinforced window of the underground research facility, watching the alien ships hover above the Pacific Ocean like massive organic thunderclouds. 3 weeks had passed since the first failed atmospheric attack, and the invaders had adapted their strategy. Now they were trying something different, precision strikes combined with psychological warfare. "They're not like anything in our theoretical models," she said to General Martinez, who stood beside her reviewing casualty reports. "Most invasion scenarios assumed aliens would either be technological or biological. These ones are both." Martinez nodded grimly. "What's our status on the coordination project?" Sarah turned away from the window and walked to her bank of monitoring equipment. Screens showed data feeds from around the world, migration patterns, animal behavior studies, ecosystem responses, and most importantly, the global communication network they had discovered just days before the invasion began. "It's working better than we ever imagined," she said, "but I'm not sure we're controlling it anymore." The discovery had started small. Marine biologists had noticed that whale songs were carrying farther than normal, reaching pods thousands of miles away almost instantly. Birdwatchers reported that migratory species were changing routes with impossible precision, as if responding to information that traveled faster than their natural communication methods. Then the invasion began, and everything accelerated. On her screens, Sarah could see real-time data from research stations across the globe. In the Amazon, trees were releasing chemical signals that somehow reached the Arctic within hours. Deep ocean sensors were detecting coordinated movements of sea life that spanned entire ocean basins. Even more puzzling, soil bacteria in different continents were showing synchronized changes in behavior. "Show me the satellite data again," Martinez requested. Sarah pulled up the orbital imagery. It showed the alien harvest ships attempting to establish extraction points at 12 locations around the world. Each attempt had failed, but not because of human military action alone. The failure patterns were too consistent, too coordinated. In Australia, a harvest ship had been forced to retreat when every venomous creature in a 100-mile radius had somehow converged on its landing site. In Brazil, another ship had been driven off by a combination of army ants, electric eels, and trees that released toxic gases in perfect timing. In the North Atlantic, whales and dolphins had worked together to create some kind of sonic interference that disrupted the aliens' biotechnology. "It's like the whole planet is fighting them," Martinez said quietly. Sarah nodded. "That's exactly what it's like, and I think that's exactly what's happening." On her largest screen, she displayed a global map showing biological activity patterns. Connections appeared as colored lines between different regions, showing communication pathways that scientists were just beginning to understand. The network was vast, complex, and undeniably active. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a cluster of activity lines converging on the alien ships. "Every time they try to establish a position, the local ecosystem responds within minutes. But it's not just local. The response involves species from thousands of miles away, all working together." Martinez studied the display. "You're saying the animals are communicating across continents?" "Not just animals. Plants, bacteria, even microscopic organisms. There's some kind of communication network that connects all life on Earth, and we never knew about it until now." As if to prove her point, an alarm began sounding from one of the monitoring stations. Sarah quickly pulled up the emergency feed. A new alien ship was attempting to land near the Yellowstone Research Station. On the screen, they could see massive biomechanical limbs extending from the vessel, preparing to begin extraction operations. "Watch this," Sarah said, her fingers flying across the control panels. The biological monitoring network around Yellowstone lit up like a Christmas tree. Underground fungal networks began pulsing with activity. Geothermal vents changed their output patterns. Bison herds, which should have been scattered and terrified, instead moved in coordinated groups toward the landing site. But the most incredible thing was what happened next. Wolves, bears, elk, and dozens of other species that normally avoided each other began working together. They didn't attack the alien ship directly. They were too smart for that. Instead, they began a systematic campaign of harassment and interference. Birds dove at the ship's sensor arrays. Large mammals disrupted the landing site by churning up the ground. Insects swarmed over critical systems. Even the trees seemed to be helping, with branches somehow positioning themselves to interfere with the ship's operations. "My God," Martinez breathed. "How is this possible?" Sarah had been asking herself the same question for weeks. The coordination was too perfect, too intelligent to be random animal behavior. It required planning, communication, and a level of strategic thinking that individual species shouldn't possess. "I have a theory," she said slowly, "but you're not going to like it." Before she could explain, another alarm sounded. This time, multiple alien ships were attempting coordinated landings on 3 different continents. Sarah's screens exploded with data as the global biological network responded. In the Arctic, polar bears were working with seals and Arctic foxes to disrupt a landing near an oil drilling platform. In Africa, elephants, lions, and even insects were converging on an alien site in coordinated waves. In the Amazon, the response was so massive that satellite imagery showed the entire rainforest appearing to shift and move. "They're learning," Martinez observed, watching the tactical displays. "The aliens are adapting, but so is whatever this is." Sarah nodded. "That's what scares me. This biological network isn't just responding to the invasion. It's learning from each encounter, getting better at fighting them." On her screens, she could see the proof. Each alien landing attempt was being met with increasingly sophisticated resistance. The first few encounters had involved simple animal harassment. Now the responses involved complex, multi-species operations that looked almost military in their precision. "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "The network is trying to communicate with us directly." She pulled up a new display showing brainwave patterns from research subjects around the world. Humans in contact with the biological network were showing synchronized neural activity that shouldn't be possible. People near major ecosystem hubs are reporting shared dreams, simultaneous insights, and coordination abilities they can't explain. It's like something is trying to connect with human consciousness directly. Martinez stared at the data. "You're suggesting that this biological network is intelligent?" "I'm suggesting it's more than intelligent," Sarah replied. "I think it's been watching us, learning from us, and now it's trying to include us in its defense strategy." Outside, another alien ship retreated from its landing attempt, driven off by a coordinated assault from dozens of species working with impossible precision. As Sarah watched the data streams from around the world, she realized that humanity was no longer fighting this battle alone. They had allies they never knew existed, and those allies were far more powerful than anyone had imagined. The question was whether humanity was ready to become part of something much larger than themselves. The answer would determine not just the outcome of the invasion, but the future of every living thing on Earth. Sarah stood in the center of the research facility's main laboratory, surrounded by screens showing data that challenged everything humanity thought they knew about their world. 6 weeks into the invasion, the patterns had become impossible to ignore. Every living system on Earth was connected in ways that defied current scientific understanding. "Run the deep ocean analysis again," she called to her team. Dr. Reyes, one of her marine biology specialists, pulled up sonar data from monitoring stations in the deepest ocean trenches. "The signals are definitely artificial, but they're not human-made. They're coming from geological formations that shouldn't be able to produce coordinated patterns." Sarah studied the readouts. The ocean floor was showing rhythmic activity that looked almost like electrical pulses traveling along underwater mountain ranges. But the ranges themselves seemed to be acting like massive neural pathways, carrying signals faster than any known biological process. "What about the fungal network data?" Dr. Kim, her ecosystem specialist, highlighted a global map showing underground fungal connections. "It's incredible. The mycelial networks don't just connect individual forests. They're part of a planetary communication system. We're detecting signal transfers between continents that happen in minutes, not the days or weeks we'd expect from natural processes." Sarah felt her understanding of the world shifting again. For weeks, they had been documenting the coordinated resistance to the alien invasion. Animals working together across impossible distances, plants releasing perfectly timed chemical signals, weather patterns that seemed designed to interfere with alien operations. But now the data was showing something even more extraordinary. "Pull up the human neural activity monitoring," she requested. The screens filled with brainwave patterns from volunteers around the world. People living near major ecosystem hubs were showing synchronized neural activity during the coordinated biological responses to alien attacks. More importantly, the patterns were becoming stronger and more complex over time. Dr. Chen, Dr. Kim said quietly, "Look at this comparison." On the screen, Kim displayed two sets of patterns side by side. One showed the electrical activity in human brains during the coordination events. The other showed the signal patterns from the underground fungal networks, ocean floor activity, and even electromagnetic emissions from certain rock formations. They were nearly identical. "That's impossible," Dr. Reyes said. "Rock doesn't think. Fungus doesn't have consciousness. These patterns must be coincidental." Sarah stared at the data, her mind racing. What if they're not coincidental? What if they're all part of the same thing? She moved to the central display and began pulling up data sets from around the world. Geological magnetic field variations, root system electrical activity, bacterial colony behavior patterns, deep ocean thermal vent changes, even the movement patterns of migratory animals. As the data assembled on the screen, a picture began to emerge that was both beautiful and terrifying. "My God," she whispered, "we're not looking at separate systems communicating with each other. We're looking at one system, one massive integrated system." Dr. Kim frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Earth isn't a planet with life on it," Sarah said slowly. "Earth is alive. The whole planet is a single living organism, and everything we think of as separate species are actually specialized organs of that organism." The laboratory fell silent. Sarah could see the disbelief on her colleagues' faces, but she pressed on, highlighting different data streams. "Look at the patterns. Root systems aren't just connecting plants, they're acting like neural networks. The fungal connections aren't just sharing nutrients, they're carrying information. The deep ocean formations aren't just geological, they're memory storage systems." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "And humans aren't the dominant species on Earth. We're Earth's nervous system. Our brains are processing nodes in a planetary consciousness that's been developing for billions of years." Dr. Reyes shook his head. "That's science fiction, not science." "Is it?" Sarah challenged. "How else do you explain instantaneous communication between continents? How do you explain coordinated behavior between species that have never encountered each other? How do you explain weather patterns that respond to alien activity faster than any natural process should allow?" She pulled up video feeds from around the world, showing the latest responses to alien invasion attempts. In each case, the resistance wasn't just coordinated, it was strategic, intelligent, and adaptive. The aliens' atmospheric weapons failed because the planet's atmospheric systems fought back. Their harvest ships can't establish positions because every local ecosystem treats them like an infection and responds accordingly. This isn't random animal behavior or even interspecies communication. This is an immune response from a planetary organism. Dr. Kim was studying the neural activity patterns again. But if this is true, why didn't we know? Why are we only seeing these patterns now? Because the invasion triggered an immune response strong enough to be detectable by our instruments, Sarah replied. Before this, the planet's consciousness was operating at levels too subtle for us to measure. We were like individual brain cells trying to understand the thoughts of the mind they're part of. As if to prove her point, alerts began sounding from monitoring stations around the world. A massive alien fleet was approaching Earth's atmosphere, larger than anything they had deployed before. But this time, the planetary response was immediate and overwhelming. On the screens, they could see coordinated activity on every continent. Ocean currents shifted to create massive electromagnetic disturbances. Atmospheric pressure changes began forming in patterns that looked almost intentional. Biological systems across the globe began releasing chemical compounds that combined in the atmosphere to create corrosive gases. But most importantly, humans around the world were reporting the same thing, a sudden, overwhelming sense of connection and purpose. They weren't just fighting for their own survival anymore. They were part of something larger, older, and vastly more intelligent than they had ever imagined. "Dr. Chen," Dr. Reyes said, his voice shaky as he watched the data streams. "If you're right about this, what does it mean for humanity?" Sarah looked at the global biological activity patterns flowing across her screens like the thoughts of a vast mind coming fully awake. "It means we've never been alone. We've been part of something incredible from the moment our species evolved. We're not just defending our planet from invasion, we're helping our planet defend itself." "And the aliens?" Sarah's expression grew grim as she watched the approaching fleet encounter Earth's atmospheric defenses. "The aliens think they're attacking a planet full of separate species. They have no idea they just declared war on a single integrated organism that's been alive since before their civilization existed." She paused, watching as the alien ships began experiencing the same equipment failures that had plagued their earlier attempts, but magnified 100-fold. "They're about to learn what happens when you try to perform surgery on something that's awake, intelligent, and very, very angry." Outside, the first alien ships began to fall from the sky, their biotechnology dissolving under an assault from every living system on Earth working in perfect harmony. Captain Zexthul watched in growing horror as his greatest fleet began to die around him. The massive bioships that had conquered thousands of worlds were dissolving like sugar in acid rain. His command vessel shuddered as another wave of atmospheric corrosives ate through the outer hull plating. "Damage report," he demanded, though his voice betrayed the fear he felt. "Hull integrity at 40% and falling," his navigator reported. "Biosystems are failing across all decks. The atmospheric processors have turned toxic. Life support is compromised on levels 7 through 15. Through the viewing screens, Zexthul could see the death of his armada. Ships that had seemed as large as moons were collapsing in on themselves, their living hulls writhing in agony as Earth's biosphere attacked them with weapons that shouldn't exist. The planet below pulsed with angry red lights as thermal vents released substances that turned the very air into a weapon. "How is this possible?" his second-in-command gasped, coughing up the translation fluid that was now burning his lungs. "No world has technology like this." Zexthul had no answer. In 8 cycles of conquest, the Ketharan had never encountered resistance like this. Most worlds died quietly. A few fought back with primitive weapons. None had ever turned their entire biosphere into a coordinated assault against invaders. On his tactical displays, he watched Earth's impossible response unfold. Ocean currents had shifted to create gravitational anomalies that pulled smaller ships into crushing depths. Magnetic field fluctuations were scrambling bioship navigation systems faster than they could adapt. Weather patterns formed and dissipated in minutes, creating electromagnetic storms that fried sensitive equipment. But the truly terrifying attacks came from Earth's creatures, working together in ways that defied all logic. "Sir, Harvest Ship 17 is reporting total system failure," came another report. "They're under attack by everything." Zexthul brought up the visual feed from the dying ship. Through the bio cameras, he could see swarms of insects that had somehow learned to carry engineered pathogens directly into Kethmoran breathing apparatus. The creatures were too small to be stopped by ship defenses, but their poison was deadly enough to kill a crew of hundreds. Another screen showed deep-sea creatures rising from oceanic trenches to attack underwater installations. Massive squids worked alongside whales to create crushing pressure waves that could crack the hulls of even the largest ships. Schools of fish moved in formations that generated electrical fields strong enough to disrupt biotechnology. Most disturbing of all, even bacteria seemed to have turned against them. The microorganisms were evolving in real time, adapting faster than any natural selection process should allow. They penetrated ship systems and began digesting alien technology from the inside out. "This isn't natural," Zexthul muttered, studying the attack patterns. This level of coordination requires intelligence. Sir, incoming transmission from the Harvest Fleet Commander, his communications officer announced. The face of Commander Rathkol appeared on the screen, his usually blue skin now gray with fear and the beginning stages of atmospheric poisoning. "Captain, we must retreat immediately," he gasped. "My ships are dying. The creatures, they're working together, all of them. Every living thing on this cursed world is trying to kill us." Zexthul could see the panic in his subordinate's eyes. "Maintain position, Commander. We cannot retreat from a primitive world." "Primitive?" Rathkol laughed bitterly. "Sir, they've turned their entire planet into a weapon. My bioships are being eaten alive by bacteria that adapt faster than we can counter them. The local wildlife is using coordinated attacks that would challenge our best military strategists. This isn't a primitive world, sir. This is something we don't understand." Before Zexthul could respond, Commander Rathkol's transmission cut to static. On the tactical display, the commander's ship signature vanished as the massive vessel collapsed into component molecules, dissolved by the planet's biological assault. Around the globe, the same pattern was repeating. Earth's creatures had somehow learned to work together in perfect harmony, each species contributing to a coordinated defense that seemed to anticipate every Ketharan tactic. In the Arctic, polar bears were working with Arctic foxes and seals to drive harvest teams into freezing water where microscopic organisms finished them off. In tropical regions, venomous snakes coordinated with poisonous plants to create kill zones that no Ketharan could survive. Even in space, Earth's magnetic field was fluctuating in patterns that disrupted ship-to-ship communications. "Sir," his science officer called out, fear making his voice high and thin, "I'm detecting massive bioelectrical activity across the entire planet. It's like the whole world is thinking." Zexthul moved to examine the readings. The instruments showed electrical patterns flowing through underground root systems, fungal networks, and even geological formations. But the patterns weren't random. They showed organization, purpose, and most terrifyingly, intelligence. "This is impossible," he whispered. As if responding to his words, every screen in the command center suddenly filled with the same image. Earth itself, viewed from space, but overlaid with a network of pulsing lights that connected every continent, every ocean, every living system. Then the image changed. Instead of a planet covered with separate species, Zexthul saw what the instruments were really detecting. A single vast organism that used continents as organs, oceans as circulation systems, and all surface life as specialized cells in an unimaginably complex body. The Ketharan hadn't been trying to harvest a world with life on it. They had been trying to perform surgery on a living, thinking, billion-year-old entity that had finally decided to wake up and defend itself. "Fleet order," he commanded, his voice shaking. "All ships retreat to the edge of the system. Maximum velocity." "Sir?" his navigator questioned. "Move!" Zexthul roared. "We're not fighting separate species. We're fighting one organism, and we just made it angry." But even as his surviving ships tried to flee, Earth's assault continued. Gravitational anomalies reached out like invisible hands, pulling ships back toward the planet's surface. Electromagnetic pulses traveled through space itself, following the fleeing vessels and continuing to tear apart their biosystems. Worst of all, the bacterial attacks continued even in space. Somehow, microscopic organisms were surviving in vacuum and continuing to dissolve ship hulls. It was as if Earth's immune system had extended beyond the planet's atmosphere, determined to eliminate every trace of the infection that had dared to attack it. Zexthul realized that his mighty fleet, which had conquered worlds across the galaxy, was about to be completely destroyed by something they had never imagined could exist. A planet that was itself alive, aware, and very, very angry. As his own ship's systems began to fail around him, he understood that they had made a terrible mistake. They hadn't come to harvest a world. They had come to commit surgery on a god. Captain Zexthul's command ship drifted in the void at the edge of the solar system, its bio-hull barely holding together. Of the mighty fleet that had arrived to harvest Earth, only 12 vessels remained, and all were dying. Around him, his crew was slowly succumbing to the bacterial infections that had followed them even into space. The organisms from Earth had somehow adapted to survive in vacuum, continuing their deadly work even millions of miles from their home world. "Sir," his communications officer whispered through lungs that were beginning to dissolve, "we are receiving transmissions from the other surviving ships. They're all requesting permission to surrender." Zexthul closed his primary eyes in defeat. Surrender. In 8 cycles of conquest, no Ketharan fleet had ever spoken that word. They had been the ultimate predators, the harvesters of worlds, the species that consumed entire biospheres without conscience or consequence. Now, they were the ones being consumed. "Open a channel to all frequencies," he commanded, his voice hoarse as the atmospheric toxins continued to burn his respiratory system. "All bands, all wavelengths, let the entity hear us." The communications officer's trembling hands worked the bio-controls. "Channel open, sir." Zexthul stared at the blue and green planet that had destroyed his civilization's greatest fleet. Even from this distance, he could see the electromagnetic storms still raging in its atmosphere, the signs of a planetary immune system that remained fully activated. We understand now," he began, speaking to the void and hoping the living world would hear him. "We didn't know what you are. We thought you were just another world with separate species fighting for resources." His words echoed across every frequency, carrying through space toward the planet that had taught them the meaning of fear. "We see now that you are one being, ancient and vast. We came to harvest your body as we have harvested others, not knowing we were attacking a living entity. We were ignorant of your true nature." Around him, his bridge crew watched the planet through their failing sensors. Earth continued to pulse with bioelectrical activity, its network of connected life forms creating patterns of light that could be seen even from space. "We will leave," Zexthul continued, his voice growing weaker as the bacterial infection spread through his system. "We will tell others of our kind to avoid this place. We will mark your system as forbidden, never to be approached again." He paused, knowing that what he was about to say went against every principle his species had ever held. "Please," he whispered, "we beg for clemency. We understand now that we were wrong. Grant us mercy, and we will never return." The transmission traveled through the darkness, carrying with it the desperate plea of a species that had never before encountered something more powerful than themselves. For long minutes, there was only silence. Then the response came. It didn't arrive as a radio transmission or electromagnetic signal. Instead, it manifested through every living thing on the dying Ketharan ships simultaneously. The bacterial colonies that were slowly dissolving their vessels began arranging themselves into patterns that formed symbols. The few remaining biosystems on the ships started pulsing in rhythms that spelled out words in the Ketharan's own language. Even more disturbing, the dying crew members found themselves speaking in unison, their voices forming words they had never learned in harmonies that no Ketharan throat should have been able to produce. The message was simple, clear, and delivered with the cold certainty of absolute judgment. You showed no clemency to the billions of worlds you consumed. You will receive the same consideration you gave them. Zexthul felt his biosuit grow cold as the words continued, spoken by his own crew as if they were merely instruments of the distant planet's will. Your species has ended countless worlds without thought or mercy. You have consumed entire biospheres, destroyed billions of years of evolution, and felt nothing for the suffering you caused. You asked for no permission. You showed no compassion. You granted no clemency to any world you harvested. The captain tried to respond, but found that his voice was no longer his own. The words continued to flow through him and his crew like a judgment passed down by something ancient and implacable. We are Earth. We have watched through human eyes as your kind destroyed world after world. We have learned your methods, your weapons, your weaknesses. We have prepared for this day since the first human spacecraft carried our awareness beyond our atmosphere. Around the ship, the other surviving vessels began to break apart as the bacterial infections reached critical systems. Zexathul watched ship after ship dissolve into component molecules, their crews becoming part of the very organisms that were killing them. Your clemency is this, the voice continued through every living system on the ship. Your message will be allowed to transmit before you die. Your warning to others of your kind will reach them. This is more mercy than you ever showed any world you harvested. Zexthul realized with growing horror that his communication system was indeed broadcasting, sending their conversation across the galaxy to every Ketharan listening post and fleet command. Let your people know what they will face if they come to harvest Earth, the planet's voice continued. Tell them that this world thinks, remembers, and defends itself. Tell them that the creatures of Earth respond to threats with perfect unity and absolute determination. The captain's ship shuddered as its biohull began the final stages of dissolution. Through his failing screens, he could see Earth in the distance, its surface now glowing with patterns of light that looked almost like neurons firing in a vast brain. We have existed for billions of years, the planetary voice said. We have survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and countless natural disasters. We have grown stronger, more connected, more aware with each passing epoch. Your species has existed for mere cycles. Did you truly believe you could prey upon something so much older and more powerful than yourselves? Zexthul tried one final time to speak on his own behalf. But the bacterial colonies in his bloodstream had taken complete control of his vocal cords. Your message ends now, Earth said through his dying crew. Your species may continue to exist, but only if they remember this lesson. Not every world is prey. Some worlds are predators. The transmission cut off abruptly. Around Zexthul, his crew collapsed as the bacterial infections completed their work. Through his fading vision, he saw the last of his fleet's ships breaking apart in the void, their remains already beginning the long journey back toward Earth's gravitational well. As his own consciousness faded, Captain Zexthul's final thought was of the warning that would soon reach every Ketharan world. Earth was not a planet to be harvested. Earth was a hunter, patient and ancient, and it had just taught the galaxy's greatest predators what it meant to be prey. On the surface of the distant blue world, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in her laboratory, watching the data streams that showed a planetary consciousness settling back into its normal patterns. The immediate threat was over, but she knew that humanity's understanding of their place in the universe had changed forever. They were not alone. They had never been alone. They were part of something vast, ancient, and protective, something that would defend them with the coordinated power of an entire living world. Outside her window, birds sang in harmonies that seemed almost deliberately musical, while trees swayed in patterns that looked almost like celebration. Earth had spoken, and the galaxy had listened. The creatures of Earth had responded to the threat exactly as they always did, together as one.